In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the basics: metal, solder temperatures, flux, and different things as far as beginning part of soldering. Basically, there are 4 different solders that you would probably be using in silversmithing. Most commonly, what you're going to use is a solder wire that looks like this here. It's just 20 or 22 gauge solder, and it comes in different temperature ranges. You have hard, which takes more heat to make it solder. Then you have medium, easy, and extra easy. Now this also comes in paste form. It might come in a syringe like this, or it could possibly come in a container like this. Now when it's in the paste form, it's already has the flux in with it, so there's no need to flux it whenever you use the paste form. Now the difference in these solders, your hard solder, it has more silver in it and less other metals. Now the hard solder, its melting point is going to be about 1450 degrees. It's going to take a little more heat. Your medium is 1370 degrees. Your easy is 1325 degrees, and your extra easy is 1270 degrees. Now the reason we use different hardnesses of solder is so whenever we do silversmithing and we make a joint, our first solder process that we do on a piece, we use hard solder. That way when we come back to solder the next piece, like if we're making a bezel and we would put the bezel together with hard solder, when we come back to fasten the bezel to the backing plate, we don't want to melt that solder joint, so we'll use a solder that solders at a lower temperature. So then we would go to medium. Now there are some silversmiths that they'll use hard solder throughout their processes. Anytime you solder a joint, it takes a little bit more heat to unsolder that, because you have a certain amount of copper that comes out of it, and then you pickle that off. But the less copper, the higher temperature that it melts at. So you could do that if you're real good with heat control. You could just use one solder throughout. Now a lot of times we use solders, especially like easy, if we've got delicate applique pieces we're adding to it for decoration. A lot of times we want to be able to solder them to it without a whole lot of heat and melting the piece. You might be doing some fine work, so that's another thing. But that kind of gives you an idea on the different solders and how you'd use them. Okay, we're going to have to start somewhere, and so we'll start here. What I've done is, first you have to measure around your cabochon to get a measurement. What I use is quilter's tape, and I've got a piece laid out here that I've run it all the way around the edge and brought it back so I knew how long this was, and I've laid it down here on my solder pad, just stuck it to it. Now what I need to do is I need to take my bezel that I'm going to use, and I've chosen this bezel, and I'm just going to lay it down here on this. Now I could scribe it or whichever, to make sure it's at my length. Now once I measure this piece, I want to add a little bit of extra to it to account for the thickness of the metal. Now I'll just make a little scribe mark on there. Now I'm going to take my shears. Now you might want to take your flush cutters and cut this, because it's a little bit, always say just cut wire with your flush cutters. What you'll end up doing is you'll damage them over time, and you'll wish you didn't. But I'm just going to clip this off right there at that mark. And now what I'll do is I'll get my file and I'll file this in flat. Now that I've got it flat, and I've put a little mark on the end. I do that so later on in the process I'll be able to see that joint. But what we're going to do is now we've got to form it around this cabochon. The easiest way to do it is use something like a dowel or something. That'll make sure it forms it straight. But we're just going to work this around the cabochon. We want it to fit nice and snug and rounded around here, so we don't want any gaps. Sometimes people might think, well, let's leave a little extra room so for sure that cabochon will fit. But any extra room you leave in there is going to show up in your final piece, and it's not going to look right. That gap is going to stick out like a sore thumb. What we'll do is we'll run this all the way around. Now, I've cut this considerably too long. What I'll do is I'll take my solder pick and I'll scribe it. I'll go ahead and cut it off, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this other end up. Whenever I get finished, I want these two ends to fit so I don't see any daylight, and it's fitting nice and square, because when you solder you have to have a tight fit solder. It doesn't fill gaps. So let me do that. Okay, I've got it to length now. It's the right length, and I've got the ends marked. And the reason I do that, once I flux it, I won't be able to see that joint if I did a good job. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to line these up to where they're going to be together and solder. Now don't worry about the shape of this. Bring these ends where they come in straight in. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep pushing this and get it lined up till it comes together and it's going to be together straight. Once we get it to where it's nice and lined up and straight and stays there, then we'll take and flux it up. Okay, I've got it all fit, I've got it all fluxed, and I've cut me a little snippet of hard solder. Now what I'm going to do is, this is one way to solder this. I've got that mark so I can see that good. I'm going to place this right over my piece of solder. I'll put that groove right over my solder. Now I've fluxed this whole piece because I want this. I'm going to nail this so it's soft, so once I get finished I'll be able to form it to my cab. It won't, part of it won't be softer than the other. Okay, and all we're going to do is I'm going to go around this piece and I'm going to try to dry that flux out. I'm not going to go right on top of the bezel. I'll heat some inside of it too, so I warm up that brick. But if you watch that flux, it starts fluffing up, and then it's going to kind of discolor maybe a little bit, and then it'll start to clear up. Once it starts to clear up, that's about 1100 degrees. That tells you it's about to the point to where your solder is going to flow. You just come over here to your joint, heat it, pull your solder up, and it's that simple. Now you might not could have seen from that angle, but we get it loose here, and sometimes it'll stick to your block from the flux, but you can see that the solder is soldered in that joint. So now what we need to do is pickle it. Okay, I've taken the piece out of the pickle now. This joint needs cleaned up, and I'll do that here in a minute. And but you can see it's not the shape. Now this joint, whenever you do this, you don't want to put all your joints together. Now I like to put this joint on the side somewhere, and so it doesn't draw a lot of attention. Then you'll take your little dowel or whatever, and you want to make sure this fits your piece good. So if there's any slack, you want it to be evened out everywhere. If it's too tight, you'll need to come back and deal with it. But then you can take it off, and what you'll do is you'll use something, maybe a piece of sandpaper, and you're going to sand this till it's flat and place it on your sheet of metal, and you're going to make sure that once you're finished that you don't have any daylight between that piece and your backing plate. Then you'll be ready to solder it on.